Most people know what the chromatic scale is, but how are you supposed to actually use the chromatic scale on bass? Hi, I'm Luke from Become a Bassist, and in this bass lesson you're going to learn two of the main functions of the chromatic scale and how you can start using it yourself to create more colourful, interesting and functional bass lines. Now you may have heard of the chromatic scale, but just in case you haven't, it's the scale that uses all of the notes in music. So if you were to play your open G string and play up every fret until you get to the 12th fret, that's the chromatic scale starting on G. Now there are plenty of songs that use the entire chromatic scale in their bass lines. For a modern example, you can check out Mark Ronson and Bruno Mars's Uptown Funk. Right before every chorus, we get this kind of line. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it just starts on this D right here and just keeps going up in half steps until we get to that high D and falls right off. It creates a ton of tension and releases it with the chorus with that big kind of slide going down there. Another example is the Rush song La Villa Stringiato. Starting right around the 6/13 mark, we get this. Yeah, it's kind of a throwaway line. It only gets played once all the way through, but it's still just a descending chromatic scale, starting on A. Pretty sweet, right? The cool thing about the chromatic scale is that no matter what key you're in, the chromatic scale will give you notes that are outside of that key. It'll give you all of the extra colors that aren't part of the key. In fact, that's where we get the word chromatic from. It's the Greek word chroma, which means color. The chromatic scale uses all of the colors, right? This is the first function of the chromatic scale, adding more colors and sounds to a line, whether it's a bass line or a melody, anything at all. Now, seeing an entire chromatic scale from top to bottom or bottom to top, it's kind of rare. It's not something you see in tons of songs, but what is much more common is to see little sections of chromaticism. This just means we get a little taste of the chromatic scale rather than the entire thing. This is totally a thing in bass lines. If you know the bass line to Led Zeppelin's Dazed and Confused, you'll know it goes like this. We've got this little chromatic run from the G, 10th fret, on the A string, down to the E, on the 7th fret, and then we get this. Yeah, from the 5th fret, the D on the A string, to the B, 2nd fret on the A string. Two kind of little chromatic runs right next to each other right there. Now notice how much tension and release there is in this one line. We start out pretty consonant, but by the time we get to this note in the first little phrase, we don't want to hang around on that note, right? We want that note to resolve down to the E, and it totally does. The same thing happens in that second part of the phrase. We start off, and it's not super tense, but by the time we get to this C right here, we really want that note to resolve the tension in this note to the B underneath it. Can you imagine if it just ended there? You want it to be right there. This is a great way to use the chromatic scale to build tension and then release that tension when you're making your own bass lines. Of course, you see chromaticism in tons of melodies as well. One that you might know that uses the chromatic scale is from the opera Carmen, the song Habanera. Now, you might not know the name, but you may recognize this. Check it out. Sound familiar? Now, you may have never thought about it, but this melody uses a really big chunk of the chromatic scale from this D all the way up here, all the way down to this G right there. So how can you start to use the chromatic scale for yourself? Now that is a great question. Let's talk about some bass lines. Now we've already talked about the chromatic scale's function in terms of adding new colors, but the second main function of the chromatic scale and chromaticism in general is something I call rhythmic problem solving. Now let me show you what I mean. Let's imagine we're playing a song where we've got a G chord going to a C chord, right? And to really accentuate the change of chord, you want to give it a little walk up to make sure it has impact when we change to the C. So I've got a little track here. That's the G chord, go into the C chord here, just like that, yeah? Now, if there are 4 beats in the bar and you wanted to play on all 4, you could use your major scale, right? But if you do that, we end up with something like this. Check it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah? See how you're landing on the C, the next chord, before you should have? We get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the chord changes. This is a problem, right? We've landed on the C on beat 4, which actually takes away from the impact you want to give the line. Now, you've got a bunch of different options to fix this. You could double one of the notes in the walk-up. You could just start on beat 2, the second beat. But a great option is to add in just a tiny little bit of chromaticism in order to delay the arrival of that C. Now, you could do that by adding in a note between the open A right here and the B. So instead of going G, A, B, C, you could go G, A, B flat, B, and then C lands on beat 1 of the following bar. Yeah, so with the track, it'll sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go again. Chromaticism there. Yeah, this is exactly what we want. We've solved that little problem using the chromatic scale. It's a rhythmic problem solver. You see this kind of thing in all sorts of real-world bass lines. If you know the Herbie Hancock song Chameleon, you know the bass line goes like this. We've got 2 little stretches of chromaticism, both of them starting on the 3rd fret and going up to the 6th fret of both the E string and the A string. From this G to the B flat and this C to the E flat. Now the tune is actually based around a kind of B flat Dorian sound. But have a listen to the difference between the actual bass line and one that's been changed so it only uses the notes of the Dorian. Here's the actual bass line. And let's change to one that uses no chromaticism. Feels weird. Now without the chromaticism, it just doesn't have the same flavor and it's not quite as smooth either. Now it's subtle, but the little bits of the chromatic scale make a huge difference to the feel and the flow of this iconic bass line. Plus it's adding new colors to the line and making sure the roots of the chords are landing in the right place. Our 2 functions of the chromatic scale are being fulfilled in this bass line right here. Very cool. There are tons more ways to use the chromatic scale and chromaticism in general. For example, you can use it when you're improvising as well, so you make sure that all the right notes fall in all the right places. But that's a big concept, probably worthy of its own video some other time. Now, if you use the chromatic scale in a way I haven't talked about yet, write it down below in the comments so everyone else can learn from it as well, myself included. To recap though, you learned all about the chromatic scale on bass. You learned that the 2 primary functions of the chromatic scale are to add color and to also solve rhythmic problems that sometimes come up. And you got a few examples of that in some bass lines and of course in some melodies as well. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you were into it, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you haven't already checked out some of the other videos too, I'm sure there's something in there that you'll enjoy a lot. I'm Luke from BecomeABassist.com, and I'll catch you in another video soon.